The Las Vegas shootings, suffering in Puerto Rico, and the Catalonian independence. I'm Gavin Kennedy, and this is The Square Circle.
If you have a passion for helping people, want to launch a new charity, or need to raise funds, Voluntary Solutions can help. You have a passion for helping people. We have a passion for helping you. Visit voluntarysolutionsdc.com, 844-739-5488.
Hello, welcome to The Square Circle. I'm Gavin Kennedy. Tonight we have Stephenie Foster of Smash Strategies, Charlie Katebi of Young Voices, and Karl Nelson of Intern Media. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
America was rocked this week by the latest mass shooting, this one occurring in Las Vegas at a country music concert. 64-year-old Stephen Paddock killed 59 people and wounded more than 500 from his window on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay hotel before being killed himself. This time it's still unclear what motivated him to do so. Charlie Katebi, terrorism has claimed the lives of 3,600 Americans since 9/11.
That's right.
Household guns have taken the lives of 3,600 Americans in the last 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Does Congress finally have an obligation to take action on this?
I think they should talk about what are the things that will actually directly allow people to be safer. But the problem is that all too often we try to put blanket solutions on a lot of these problems. Frankly, he used an AR-15, which is used by millions of Americans, not only for sporting purposes, but to defend the lives of their families peacefully every year. There is one thing, though, that could actually help mitigate these sorts of crises, and it's to make it harder for people to attain something called a bump stock. Now, this is a device that's used to turn semi-automatic weapons into automatic weapons and let them fire as rapidly as machine guns. This also, however, makes them very inaccurate. So they would be terrible at for sporting purposes and for home defense, but very good at firing into a large crowd inaccurately. And a lot of people, including Republicans and including the NRA, don't think that there is a valid reason to actually make that readily accessible. So a lot of people have been talking about making it harder to purchase this bump stock.
Stephenie Foster, do you think it's time for Congress to take action?
Well, I do, and I think that I appreciate that today, especially, there's been a lot of discussion about actually doing something about this particular piece of machinery that has made this particular gun much more lethal. But I think Congress should do more, and I think we really need to see this as not only an issue around the guns themselves, but around public health. About 93 people die every day for gun violence in the United States, and I think we need to think about how we distinguish in some ways between the types of guns people reasonably use for hunting, with these kind of weapons that really are only used to kill massive numbers of people. And so I think there are other things that Congress should consider in addition to this, which I'm thinking, given the conversation, may pass, but also looking at more clearly defining waiting periods, really looking into background checks. Certainly this wouldn't help in every situation, and every situation is a little bit different. But I think that we really need to look at things that can help ensure that we're keeping guns out of the hands of people who really are only thinking about using them to basically kill massive amounts of people.
Karl Nelson, gun control was a lost cause even when there was a divided government. Now Republicans control both houses of Congress and the White House. Is there any chance that there's going to be movement on this with midterm elections coming up next year?
I truly hope so. I truly hope so, because I hope that this is not a situation where we're talking about gun control for the next 2 weeks and then it's one of those things that we kind of brush underneath the rug again. I think that the problem is sometimes when you say gun control, you say those two words. What happens is people automatically think that you're trying to take their guns away. You know, gun advocates and those who, everyone has the right to, to keep and bear arms. But at the same time, the question is, can we put limitations? this individual, this shooter, since I think the 1980s, he was collecting guns, he was collecting ammo. In the past year alone, he had purchased 33 weapons. This was reported. So I just think that when we're talking about gun control, if we had something in place that could put some limitations on, the amount of bullets and the amount of ammo that you can actually have in your possession, the amount of weapons that you can purchase, in terms of also you got to think about the background checks as well. So I do think it's time for them to kind of come together. This is a bipartisan issue. It should be a bipartisan issue moving forward, I believe. Yeah.
But Charlie, let me ask you this.
Sure.
In the United States, you're 51 times more likely to die at the end of a barrel of a gun than in the United Kingdom. Why do you think that is?
Well, here's something we also need to keep in mind, is that guns have become a lot more accessible. The number of Americans have been purchasing a lot more guns. But here's another thing. The incidences of violent crime, particularly violent crime involving guns, has fallen, according to the Department of Justice, by 76% since the early 90s.
In comparison with the United Kingdom, though, I want you to address that issue.
Here's the thing about comparing it to other countries. We can compare the United States to the UK, but here's the thing. We're not the UK. We're a different country with a different culture and a much different number of demographics. We can, however, compare the United States to what the United States was 2 decades ago. That's
so
a
you think
far
it may
better
be a
comparison.
demographic issue that it makes it 51 times more likely to die at the end of a barrel of a gun in the United States than in the United Kingdom?
We live differently. We have different attitudes on all sorts of things. We have a different sort of history.
What are those different attitudes that impact the chances of being shot to death 51 times?
I'll tell you one thing. I mean, there are a lot of places in the United States with a lot more poverty. And if you want to talk about what is correlated with crime, it's poverty. That might be something I would love to talk about.
If you go into the East End of London or suburban Leeds or Birmingham or Liverpool or Manchester or the north of England and Newcastle, I can assure you that there is abject poverty in England as well. But they don't shoot each other to death.
Absolutely. But I want to make this perfectly clear. A far better comparison is where the United States was 2 decades ago, and we had far more crime, far more violent crime than today. And that was also correlated with stricter gun laws. So as states have loosened their gun laws, we've had less crime, and that needs to be recognized.
So it's
in
a
this
legislative.
discussion.
It's a legislative issue.
Yes, absolutely. As states have liberalized their gun laws, people have become safer, with fewer incidences of crime overall, but especially violent crime, and that needs to be recognized. That guns possibly may have contributed to a safer, more peaceful society that we live in.
In Dunblane in Scotland, there was a massacre of, I think, 23 or 24 children in the late 90s. And the British government just unilaterally acted and banned completely all handguns. There hasn't been a massacre since.
Right, and that's also true in Australia. That's a story that's been widely circulated in the days since this incident. And I would disagree a little bit about why crime rates have gone down. I think it's about policing. It's about a lot of things. I think one important thing here is that there's a lot of polling that shows that Americans across party lines really want there to be stronger gun regulation. If that helps us have a conversation instead of saying gun control, because I take your point that people get very nervous about that phrase. But the numbers are very high. Both Republicans and Democrats and independents in large numbers would like there to be a stronger licensing scheme so that people who have guns have some kind of police licensing for the weapon or weapons that they own.
I'd like to remind our viewers that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, or via Facebook or Twitter, and we'll answer as many as we can live on air towards the end of the show. Also this week, the situation in Puerto Rico continued to be a major story. Here is the mayor of San Juan speaking last week.
If anybody out there is listening to us, we are dying. And you are killing us with the inefficiency and the bureaucracy. So I am done being polite. I am done being politically correct. I am mad as hell. So I am asking the members of the press to send a mayday call all over the world. We are dying here.
3.4 million United States citizens live in Puerto Rico. Right now, they have been without electricity and running water for 2 weeks in a tropical climate. Karl, my question for you is, are those citizens any less entitled to government assistance in their time of need than, say, the residents of Long Island when Hurricane Sandy came through in 2012?
They should not be. They shouldn't be, right? But that's not the message that's coming from the president right now, unfortunately. I'm not too surprised about that. But they are kind of being treated as if they're an outsider. The bottom line is this: you have, and I'm sitting here looking at some of my notes, and it's polarizing to me. Puerto Rico has about 69 hospitals. 64 right now are finally getting to a point where they can operate partially. Because like you said, a lot of these people are without, well, all of them are without just the basic necessities. Water, power. There's a limit on transportation. It's just a lot of different things taking place right now, and these people are really hurting. And to have the president go over there and visit, and to compare it to, Hurricane Katrina. You mentioned Hurricane Katrina. I just don't think that's the place or the time to do that, because these people are hurting. But unfortunately, that's what we kind of saw this week.
Charlie, this wouldn't happen, as I said, in Long Island or the Upper East Side. People being left without electricity or water for weeks. Why do you think it's allowed to happen in Puerto Rico? I mean, they're protected by the same Bill of Rights that residents of the Upper East Side are.
Absolutely, but the Bill of Rights doesn't doesn't take away the fact that Puerto Rico is separated by 90 miles between Florida and Puerto Rico. And the reason why
would it happen in Hawaii?
Actually, probably. And the reason why is because we have a law that makes it far more expensive to ship goods overseas between states and localities than between landlocked states. And the reason why is because of a law known as the Jones Act, which says that foreign-made and foreign-manned ships cannot ship between the United States.
But I'm referring to the actual recovery effort and assistance effort that should be happening right now. It's probably not to do with the legislation about that shipping right. It's about pouring large amounts of manpower and large amounts of money directly into the situation where people are suffering right now.
I would say it is very hard to pull enough money, especially if those ships are cost 4 times as much as a foreign-made ship. And the fact is that there are millions of Puerto Ricans that don't have access to food, clean water, and electricity, and it's much harder if the
So you think it's the tariffs? You think it's the shipping tariffs that's causing the delay?
We know that. We know that, and not only that, FEMA, through all its regulations and compliance requirements, make it far harder and far slower to actually get the right resources to the right places. We saw that with Katrina. Louisiana is not a landlocked state, but they also dealt with all this red tape and regulations that made it harder for people to get resources and get recovery efforts to rebuild their houses and get emergency supplies in. And we can blame Trump for just being insensitive and just being not that great a person at these times of crises. But frankly, the federal government, and especially those tariff laws, have just made it very hard for island territories like Puerto Rico to recover.
Well, I want to just jump in here if I could. I think one thing is, usually, and we unfortunately have a lot of natural disasters, the president is sort of the comforter in chief, right? Thanks the first responders, says how sorry he is that this has happened, and offers to make all the assistance necessary available to the state or the community where this has happened. That didn't happen here, and I think, in fact, what is troubling to me, and I think I want to get back to the Jones Act, but is just this insensitivity around sort of how he talked about the mayor, particularly of San Juan, how he talked about the people there, sort of making fun almost a little bit of the situation. I don't think that helps bring us together. And I would say in this time right now in the United States, more than anything, I feel like there are many, many polarizing issues, and we really need to figure out a way to come together, and we should be able to rely on our president to do that. I think with the Jones Act, I agree that was an issue, but it took 6 days, almost a week, to really waive the Jones Act so that foreign flag carriers could go to Puerto Rico to deliver supplies. And I think the other concern is what else happened in those 6 days, and the answer is not much in terms of federal action. So not to say the federal government is a perfect institution or entity, but we lost sort of a weekend. It was like the lost weekend there of between the time the disaster occurred and action started to happen. It was about 6 days, and that's a long time. And yes, maybe it's because it's a little, the water makes it more difficult to get there, but I don't think that really is an excuse for not taking that 6 days to really plan and really get ready to do what needed to be done for the people of Puerto Rico.
The president did say after his trip down there that I think it's 75 billion of their municipal debt needs to be wiped out. That was quickly backpedaled by his budget director, Mick Mulvaney. Obviously, the unburdening of that debt from the economy would be a tremendous boon to their recovery from the hurricane. Why do you think his budget director was so quick to reverse that statement by the president?
One of you guys want to take this one?
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if the President of the United States has the authority to wipe out that debt, and also more importantly, if he was actually ever going to signal that, and he had the authority to.
Well, he would send a bill to Congress.
Puerto Rico would be ruined by that. No one would ever buy the debt. No one would ever lend to Puerto Rico ever. And if you were going to tell a hurricane hits island that no one was going to borrow from them ever, that no one was ever going to lend to them, that would devastate that community.
So he's doing them a favor by not relieving them of the debt.
I mean, it's impossible, as I said before. As well, it would immensely harm them. If you're in hard times and no one wants to lend to you, I don't know, you could probably ask an unemployed homeowner how that feels.
Finally, the movement for independence in the Spanish region of Catalonia gained steam this week. Here is the story from Al Jazeera.
Catalonia's leader asked the world to accept his region's vote for independence and broker a divorce from Spain.
El moment aconsella mediació.
The moment calls for mediation, and it has to be international to be effective.
Puigdemont called for a formal independence vote from the region's parliament. The response from the European Union was swift and, to secessionists, disappointing.
Under the Spanish Constitution, yesterday's vote in Catalonia was not legal.
In Madrid, Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy met with his cabinet as his country faced a constitutional crisis.
Today, Spain's Constitutional Court has suspended Catalonia's parliamentary session, which was due to take place this Monday, and they were expected to declare independence at that parliamentary session. Stephenie Foster, the Catalan separatist leader, Carlos Puigdemont, has called for negotiations. Do you think this might be an opportunity for Trump to show American leadership and offer to facilitate those negotiations? Perhaps he could appoint a special envoy. Maybe he could send over Rex Tillerson for a year or two.
Well, I mean, just to step back, and I'll answer your question in a second. I mean, I think that this is obviously, as many diplomatic problems are, an unfortunate situation where we have overreaching really by both the backers of the secessionist movement, and I think the Spanish police were very heavy-handed in trying to stop, the people from voting, and also people who are in the streets supporting them. So that's a very difficult situation. Having said that, I mean, the United States government's position is and has been that we support a united Spain, we support free speech, peaceful protest, and so really—
Is that a part of State Department policy that a united Spain is?
It is, yes.
Does that include Gibraltar?
Well, I really don't know about that. So
Britain might have something to say on that one.
Talking about this particular situation, but we have always supported a united Spain, and so really looking at this, the question becomes: is this vote something that does spark negotiation, as opposed to some kind of secession from Spain, which would be very difficult, and there is no international right to do so. And it would create a lot of tension, obviously, with the ability to get back into the EU. So would it benefit
the United States for them to offer to be a peace broker like they did in Northern Ireland, or will Trump remain in the isolationist mode and let them take care of themselves?
I think it always benefits the United States to be a leader on global issues. Certainly we've been a leader in trying to resolve issues in a lot of places. In Northern Ireland, in Ireland certainly, we had George Mitchell was an envoy. And there's a lot going on in the world where we are trying to play a role to broker peace, whether that's in Syria, Iraq, lots of different places. So I think this is certainly something where United States leadership is very critical. I will say, I mean, I just left the State Department in January. In the last administration, this administration has not been very favorable to a lot of special envoys. In fact, one of the things that was sort of on the table in terms of State Department reorganization and reform is to get rid of special envoys. And so there's been a lot of pressure on Secretary Tillerson to keep some of them because there are obvious reasons we need them. But just to say, I don't think this is a tool that this administration is particularly interested in using. I'm not saying we shouldn't use it. I just think this is not something that this administration is particularly interested in.
They could dust down George Mitchell. He's probably in rehab after his 6 months in the Middle East trying to resolve the Palestine-Israeli issue. The Madrid government has refused to rule out invoking Article 155 of the Constitution, which removes all autonomy from Catalonia. Puigdemont has said that if they did so, it would be a terrible mistake. This could escalate very quickly. Spain has seen a civil war with the Basque separatists, ETA, for the last 30 years, just come to a conclusion. How do you think it's going to pan out over the next weeks and months?
I think it's awfully quaint that we're talking about what does the Spanish government think? What does the American government think? When we're not actually asking the real question, why do Catalonians want independence? And the reason why is because they're being asked to shoulder the burden of the Spanish government to stay in the EU. And they really feel like they don't want the higher taxes, the benefit cuts from the top down. And this is the same thing we saw with Brexit. It's the same reason why we saw people that voted for Trump reject the establishment. And we need to understand the fact that people don't want to just keep giving more power to central governments like the Spanish government or the EU. And we need to be very cognizant of the fact that they have very real problems with the way their society is going, and we need to think about that.
Well, I think that's an issue for thinking about negotiation as opposed to secession. So there's a question, of course, about whether or not this vote was actually done in a transparent and fair way. Mm-hmm. People could say people voted, you could vote anywhere, you didn't have to go to your polling place, so there are stories of people voting multiple times, et cetera. We don't know, and the fact, I'm not saying that was a huge problem, but I think it's an issue of not knowing what happened, and so really trying to ensure that if there is another vote, that it's done in a fair and transparent manner.
Karl, the EU President Donald Tusk said that the EU would not grant Catalonia membership of the EU because the vote was not legal. Mm-hmm. You think this might be another leak in the dam of the European Union project after Brexit?
Yes, it might be. I'm sorry. I just want to just respond to something.
Sure, go ahead.
He said, you've been bringing up some good points today. But a question that you posed. You said, do all the Catalonians want to declare independence? I would actually challenge that. And the only reason I challenge that is because if you go and look at the referendum, what was voted for on Sunday. Of that population, only a little bit over 40% actually voted, for the referendum. I know there was a peaceful protest. I know that some people were not able to.
The police may have been involved.
They were
a little bit.
They were, but at the same time, if you're talking about 42, 43% of people that actually went and voted for it. What does that say about the others, right? And then even with that, I think you had about 90% that voted in favor of it. But that's also a question too, like a counter question too.
How many people voted in the U.S. election? What percentage of the electorate voted in the U.S. election?
That's a good question. What percentage was it?
Anyone know? Less than 50%?
It's usually it's around 50% usually. Yeah.
I think it was in the 40s.
Yeah. Okay, let's take some questions from our viewers. Lynn Summers asks, is there any legitimate reason for a private citizen to own a bump stock? Stephenie. A bump stock being the addition to a semi-automatic weapon that turns it into fully automatic.
I mean, I don't think so. And I think the thing that is very interesting about where we are today is I don't think the majority of people think so. We have the NRA actually saying that that particular piece of machinery should be banned. We have Republican members of Congress who have been very, supported by the NRA, big gun supporters saying that as well. So I think this is a rare moment where we may all agree, or most of us, across party lines and across lines on this debate around guns to really get rid of this, making this particular piece of machinery illegal.
Karl?
No, I don't. I actually agree with what you said. I don't see any type of reason why people should be able to have access to a bump stock, like you said, that can turn a semi-automatic weapon to a dangerous, fully automatic weapon. Obviously, the shooter in Las Vegas had access to those, and we saw what happened.
We're going to go to Terry Ballard. If Catalonia declares independence, would Madrid be justified in using force to keep it from seceding? Charlie Kateri.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
If Catalonia declares independence, would Madrid be justified in using force to keep it from seceding?
I don't think so. I think people are fed up with the way the Spanish government has heaped these huge sacrifices on the people of Catalonia, and I think they've had enough.
Stephenie?
I mean, I don't think anyone needs to be using force right now. I think the issue is looking at how to ensure that this vote is used as part of a negotiation process. Catalonia already has certain sort of dispensations from the Spanish government. And if there's a need for there to be more, or there's a negotiation that can be ongoing, I think that's what's important right now, not really stoking up really any more use of force to really have any impact on this particular vote.
Prime Minister Rajoy has insisted that before any negotiations begin, that the Catalan separatists withdraw their claim for independence. That's an interesting little caveat to begin negotiations and independence. You think that's helpful?
I think they should come to the table in good faith and actually find out what are they looking for and find common ground before asking for just universal surrender.
You think the U.S. should offer their diplomatic assistance?
In what sense? I think this is between...
Insofar as offering a moderator, a mediator, a special envoy?
That's between Catalonia, Spain, and the EU.
Oh, okay, so none of U.S.'s business?
Not my opinion.
Okay. Now it's time for the most underreported story of the week. Who would like to start?
I'll take it.
Very good.
I'll take it. O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson.
Released?
Huh?
Released.
He's been released, yeah. And it's something that obviously, because it was going to Vegas, it hasn't really been reported on much, rightfully so. But he has been released. The million-dollar question is, will he remain released, or will he find himself, behind bars again? I did see a report, and I'm gonna be quick. I did see a report that Tuesday night he had a secret autograph session.
Was he selling them?
I believe he was, and that could be a problem because in his civil suit, any money he makes outside of his pension.
Charlie, what do you got for us?
There was an amazing study that came out a few days ago that found that it was a study by professors from Berkeley and Stanford that found that actually all the money that's spent on canvassing, cold calling, voters actually does nothing.
Zero effect.
Zero effect, absolutely. It can bring out new people, the converted, but it doesn't actually change hearts and minds.
Does it also not have any effect in primaries?
I heard that it does have an effect on primary, but it only has to do with bringing out people that are already converted to your side.
Stephenie, what do you have for us?
I think the most underreported story of the week is that today King Salman of Saudi Arabia met with Putin. And this is the first time that a Saudi monarch or a Saudi leader has met with a Russian leader ever. And it's really a signal about the role of Russia asserting itself as a world power.
And there's an energy issue.
Energy issue, it's around Syria. It's also around, are we a reliable partner for Saudi Arabia? And I think that's a little bit of what this story is about.
Thank you, Stephenie. That's it for this week. I'm Gavin Kennedy, and thanks for watching The Square Circle. We'll see you next week.